There's a kind of man in every small town that people decide about. They don't ask him. They don't wait for the truth. They just look at the shape of his silence and fill it in with whatever story makes them feel safer at night. Wade Coffey was that man for 7 years. And the only one who never believed the town's version of him was a half-blind cattle dog who couldn't talk, but who, every single morning that last dry summer, walked out into the desert and came back carrying a rock in his mouth. One rock, then another, then another. Day after day, until there was a pile by Wade's porch that nobody understood. I'm the one who finally followed that dog out past the wash. I'm the one who found out what those rocks were really marking. And I'm telling you now, before any of it, I would give a lot to unknow it. Because what that animal had been doing, quietly, faithfully, for the better part of 2 months, ended up answering a question this whole town had been too afraid to ask out loud. Stay with me, this one doesn't let go easy. The first rock landed on Wade Coffey's porch step on a Tuesday, and I only know that because Tuesdays are when I write my numbers down. I keep a log, have for 31 years. Rainfall, cattle weights, what the wind did, which fence post finally gave out. My late wife used to say I'd write down my own funeral if somebody'd hand me the date. So when I say it was a Tuesday, I'm not guessing. I had my book open on the truck seat, and I was driving the section road that runs between my land and Wade's, and I saw the dog come up out of the low ground with something in his mouth. I slowed, old habit. You watch animals out here whether you mean to or not. The dog was Wade's blue heeler, Boone. Had to be 12, 13 years old by then. One eye had gone milky 2 winters back, and he carried his head at a tilt to make up for it, which gave him the look of a creature always half-asking you a question. He came up the rise stiff-legged, the way old dogs move when they've decided something matters more than their hips do, and he had a rock the size of a man's fist clamped in his teeth. He carried it straight up to the porch and set it down, not dropped, set, like he was being careful with it. Then he turned around and went back into the desert. I sat there in the truck with the engine ticking, and I'll be honest, I laughed a little. Sarcastic, low, to nobody. Great, I thought. Even the dog's lost his mind out here. Because by then everybody knew Wade had gone quiet in the way that worries you, and a man's dog hauling rocks home seemed like exactly the kind of strange that grows in a house where grief has been left to sour. I should back up. You can't understand the rocks without understanding the quiet, and you can't understand the quiet without understanding what the town had decided about Wade Coffey. 7 years before that Tuesday, Wade's wife disappeared. Her name was Marion. I want to say it plain because the town spent a long time saying it in a whisper, the way you say a word you think might be dirty. Marion Coffey. She was a school teacher, taught the little ones their letters over at the county school, and she had a laugh you could hear across a parking lot. Big laugh. Too big for her, almost like it had been issued to a taller woman by mistake. People liked her. People liked her more than they liked Wade, if I'm being straight about it, because Wade was the sort of man who'd give you the shirt off his back and not one word to go with it. He was kind in deeds and broke in conversation. Some people can't tell the difference between a quiet man and a cold one. One night in the spring, 7 years back, Marion's truck was gone from the coffee place, and so was she. And she never came back. Now, here's where a town shows you what it's made of. There was no note, no suitcase missing that anyone could prove, no money pulled from the bank. The sheriff at the time, old Cobb, dead now, he poked around for a while and came up with nothing, and nothing is a terrible thing to hand a town. People can't live in nothing. They'll build something in it just to have walls. So they built. The kind version was that Marion had run off, found somebody, or just found the door and lit out for a bigger life than a cattleman could give her. That was the version the soft-hearted ones told, the ones who wanted to forgive her and pity him. The other version, the one that traveled faster because the ugly ones always do, was that Wade had done something to her. Nobody said it to his face. Out here we're too polite for that, which is its own kind of cruelty. will convict a man entirely behind his back and then nod to him at the feed store. But it was there, in the way conversation dropped a half step when he walked into the diner, in how the women would gather their kids a little closer, not even meaning to, their hands moving on instinct. In the fact that in 7 years, not one soul brought that man a casserole, and out here we bring casseroles for a stubbed toe. Wade knew, of course he knew. A quiet man hears everything. And he never defended himself. Not once. That was the part that hanged him in the town's eyes. An innocent man yells, they figured. An innocent man bangs his fist on the sheriff's desk. Wade just went home and shut the door and got quieter every year, and they read that silence as guilt, when I've come to think it was something closer to a man too gutted to bother arguing with people who'd already made up their minds. I never believed the ugly version. I'll tell you why, and it's not because I'm a better man than the rest of them. It's because of one thing I saw years before that I never could shake. I'd come over to Wade's to borrow a post driver. This was back when Marion was still around. I came up the drive and the two of them were out by the garden, and they didn't know I was there yet, and Wade was kneeling in the dirt fixing the wire on a tomato cage, and Marion came up behind him and just laid her hand on the back of his neck. Didn't say anything. And Wade stopped what he was doing and put his own dirty hand up over hers and held it there. Just for a second. Two people who'd long ago run out of things they needed to say out loud. You don't fake that. I've been married. You cannot fake the thing where you reach up to hold a hand without even looking to see whose it is. You only get that from years. So when the town decided Wade Coffey was a man who could hurt that woman, I decided the town was wrong, and I mostly kept it to myself, because that's the coward's middle path and I'm not proud of it. All that's to say, when I saw Boone hauling a rock up to the porch, my first thought wasn't what a miracle. My first thought was that poor broken family, animals included. I drove on home. But you know how a thing gets in you. The next day I made up a reason to drive that road again. Told myself I was checking the water gap on the south fence, which I was, eventually, after I'd slowed down by Wade's place to look. There were 3 rocks on the porch now. The day after that, 5. By the end of that week there were near a dozen, all roughly the same size, all set in a loose heap by the bottom step, and I sat in my truck doing math I didn't like. Because a dog doesn't do a thing 12 times by accident. A dog that lazy with age doesn't walk out into open desert in July heat, day after day, and haul stone home in his mouth for nothing. Animals don't pad their word count. They don't do busy work. If Boone was spending the last good summers of his life carrying rocks, then to that dog, those rocks meant something. I want to tell you I figured it out fast. I didn't. I'm a slow man. I sat with it the better part of 2 weeks. What finally moved me wasn't the rocks, it was Wade. I saw him at the co-op, picking up mineral tubs, and I made myself walk over because nobody else would and I was tired of being one of the nobodies. Up close he looked bad in a way that scared me. Not sick exactly, scooped out. Like somebody had gone in with a spoon and taken the part of a man that leans toward tomorrow and left just the husk that has to get through today. Wade, I said. He nodded, didn't quite meet my eye. That dog of yours, I tried to make it light, he's been redecorating your porch. And here's the thing I'll never forget. Wade's face did something, just for a flicker. His jaw worked and his eyes went wet and bright for 1/2 a second, and then he clamped it all down so hard I heard his teeth click. He won't stop, Wade said, quiet. I've tried to stop him, he won't stop. Where's he getting them? Out past the wash. Wade looked at his boots. I don't go out there. There was a weight on I don't go out there that I felt in my chest before I understood it. Why not? I asked. And Wade Coffey looked at me, actually looked at me. Milk-eyed dog's owner, broken man, town's ghost, and he said, because that's the way she went. Then he loaded his tubs and left, and I stood in the co-op parking lot with the heat coming up off the gravel, and my pocket watch out of my vest. my thumb running over the cracked face of it the way it does when my hands need somewhere to be. That's the way she went. 7 years and nobody, not Cobb, not the new sheriff, not one of the casserole-hoarding gossips, had ever said the simplest thing out loud, which was which direction. Which way did Marion's truck point when it left that night? Everybody'd been so busy deciding whether Wade was a killer that not one of us had stood on his porch and asked the desert where. But Boone knew where. That old dog had been telling us for 2 weeks, we just don't speak rock. I didn't sleep good that night. I lay there and listened to my own house tick, and I thought about the way Wade said I don't go out there, and I understood it. God help me. Because if you've spent 7 years not knowing, the not knowing becomes a kind of home. A terrible home, but a home. The day you find out is the day the door closes behind you forever, and some men would rather stand in the doorway of the rest of their life than walk through it and learn what's on the floor. Wade couldn't go out there. I think he'd known for a long time in the animal part of him what he'd find, and knowing but not seeing was the only thing keeping him upright. But the dog had no such mercy in him. Boone wasn't protecting Wade from the truth. Boone was bringing the truth home, one rock at a time, the only way a creature can who loves you and can't speak, laying the evidence on the porch and waiting for the slow humans to understand. I made up my mind around 3 in the morning. I'd follow the dog. I wouldn't tell Wade. I'd just go out past the wash with him and see where those rocks were coming from, and if it was nothing, a den, a habit, an old dog gone soft in the head, then I'd come home and never speak of it and let that family be. And if it was something, well, I didn't let myself finish that thought. Some thoughts you keep half-built on purpose. I was up before light. I packed water more than I'd need, because the desert in July does not forgive optimism. I put a shovel in the truck bed and then I stood looking at it for a long minute, that shovel, what it meant that I'd put it there, and then I left it in. I put in my log book out of pure habit, and I drove the section road in the gray dark and parked where the road dips toward the low ground, and I waited. Sun came up the color of a struck match. And right on time, like he'd been doing it his whole life, old Boone came stiff-legging it down off the coffee place and out across the flat, head tilted, one milk eye catching the light, moving with that awful patient purpose, out toward the wash and whatever lay past it. I got out of the truck, my knees cracked, my mouth was dry already and not from the heat. All right, I said to the dog to myself to the morning. All right, show me. And I followed him out. Which way, by, you said. Part 2, Part 211, 27 a.m. Claude responded. Part 2, orchestrated narrative continuation with character consistency, and packing orchestrated narrative continuation with character consistency, and packing Part 2. Boone didn't wait for me. That was the first thing I learned out there. The dog had a job, and I wasn't part of it. I was just allowed to come along. He moved at his own pace, which was slower than a man's walk and somehow harder to keep up with, because he never stopped. No sniffing. No wandering. An old dog will usually read the ground like a newspaper, nose down, distracted by every rabbit that ever passed. Not Boone. He went in a line, straight as a fence wire, out past the wash and into the broken country beyond it, and I came behind with my water and my shovel and the sun climbing my back like it had somewhere to be. I've been past the wash before, years ago, hunting strays. It's bad ground out there. The kind of country that looks flat from the road and turns out to be a maze of cuts and dry channels once you're in it. Ground that drinks rainwater and gives back nothing, dotted with creosote and the gray skeletons of cholla. Heat comes up off the hardpan in sheets. By 8 in the morning the air was already shimmering at the edges, and I had that swimmy feeling you get when the day's going to be a killer. Boone never slowed. We walked maybe 40 minutes. I marked it. I always mark it. Pulled the watch from my vest and noted the time the way I note everything, because if a man's going to do a hard thing he might as well have a record of it. My thumb found the crack in the watch face. 41 minutes out from the truck and Boone dropped down into a shallow draw, one of 100 that all looked the same, and he stopped. First time he'd stopped since the porch. He stood over a spot of ground and he looked back at me. One good eye, one milk eye. And I will tell you that I have been read by a lot of animals in my life, but I have never in my life been waited for the way that dog waited for me. Patient, almost gentle, like he knew the next part was going to be hard on me and he was sorry about it, but it had to be done. I came up beside him. There was a pile of rocks there, small one, a dozen or so, same size as the ones on the porch, sitting in the bottom of the draw. And I understood, slow as I am, that this was the source, not where he was bringing them, but where he was taking them from. He'd been carrying these home one at a time, unstacking this pile, rock by rock, and rebuilding it on Wade's porch. Which made no sense at all until I looked closer at the ground the rocks had been sitting on. The dirt there was different. It's hard to explain to somebody who hasn't spent their life reading dirt, but you live on land long enough, you can see where it's been disturbed. The desert lays itself down in layers, packs itself hard, grows its little crust of life on top, and where something's been dug, even years back, the ground heals different, softer. The crust doesn't match. There was a patch there, maybe the length of a person, where the desert had been opened up once and then closed again, and the closing had never quite taken. And the rocks had been piled on top of it. Somebody had put those rocks there, on purpose, to mark a place, or to hold a place down. I felt the morning go very quiet and very loud at the same time. You know the feeling. The blood comes up in your ears like water. Boone lay down a few feet off. Just lay down in the shade of a creosote, the way a dog does when his shift is over and he's handing the thing to you. He'd done his part. 7 years he'd carried it, near as I could figure, found this place however a dog finds a thing, and been coming out here, and finally, this last summer, started bringing it home because his master wouldn't come to it. He'd been trying to show Wade, drag the proof to the porch since the man wouldn't walk to the grave. I want to be honest about what I did next, because it wasn't brave. I sat down. I just sat down on a rock at the edge of that draw, and I put my head in my hands and I sat there a long while, because I knew, the way you know a storm before it's over the ridge, what I was sitting next to. And I did the cowardly math one more time. I thought I could leave. I could walk back to my truck and drive home, and this could go on being nobody's business. Wade could keep standing in his doorway. The town could keep its ugly story, and I could keep my hands clean of it. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about finding the truth. The truth doesn't set everybody free. Sometimes the truth is a bill that comes due, and somebody's got to pay it, and once you dig it up you can't put it back in the ground. If I dug there and found what I thought I'd find, then either way Wade Coffey's life was over. If Marion was down there because somebody hurt her, then the worst day of his life was about to start over, fresh, 7 years late. And if she was down there because of him, if the town had been right all along, and I'd been the fool with my pretty story about a hand on the back of a neck, then I was about to be the man who handed a murderer to the law, and I'd have to look at that garden and that tomato cage for the rest of my life, and know I'd been wrong about the only thing I'd been sure of. I didn't want to know. I sat in that draw and I did not want to know, and I am not proud of it. And I think anybody who says they'd have grabbed the shovel and dug straight off is either lying or has never loved a place enough to be afraid of what's buried in it. It was the dog that moved me. Boone got up, and I swear this is true. I wrote it in my book that night so I wouldn't talk myself out of it later. Boone got up off the ground, and he walked over to that marked patch of dirt, and he lay back down, on top of it. Right on the soft ground where the crust didn't match. He put his chin on his paws and he looked at me with that one good eye, and he let out a breath, long and slow, the kind of sound an old animal makes when it finally gets to set a weight down. He'd been guarding it, all these years. That's what the rocks were, not just markers. They were a cairn. That dog had been tending a grave the only way he knew how, and now he'd brought a human to it, and he was lying on it like he could keep her warm. And I understood that if I drove home and left this in the ground, I'd be leaving that old dog out here too, because he was never going to quit. He'd carry rocks until his heart gave out. He'd die on this patch of dirt before he'd let her be forgotten. A dog's loyalty will shame you into being a better man than you are. That's the whole of it. That's the only reason I stood up. All right, I said, my voice came out wrong. All right, Boone, move over now, let me. He moved. He went a few feet off and sat, ears up, watching, and I got the shovel. I'll spare you most of the digging. It's not a thing that wants describing. The ground was hard on top and softer underneath, just like I'd read it, and that softness told its own story, that this hole had been dug before, by hands in a hurry, in the dark most likely, 7 years gone. I went slow. Partly the heat, partly because some part of me was still bargaining, still hopping I'd hit nothing but caliche and old roots and could go home a fool instead of a witness. I had to stop twice for water. The sun was straight up by then, no mercy in it, and the sweat ran off me and dried before it hit the dirt. My hands blistered through my gloves. I am 66 years old and I dug a hole in the desert in July with an old dog watching me and a pocket watch ticking in my vest, and somewhere around 2 feet down the shovel struck something that was not a rock. I knew the sound. You know it too the second you hear it, even if you've never heard it. The ground tells you. There's dirt sound and stone sound and root sound, and then there's a fourth sound, soft and final, that the body recognizes before the mind will agree to. I got down on my knees. I want to tell you I was strong about it. I wasn't. I knelt in that hole with my hands and I moved the dirt away gentle as I could, the way you'd uncover something you were afraid to wake, and the desert had done what the desert does, which is keep things, and I found enough. I'm not going to lay it out for you. There's a kind of telling that's just cruelty wearing the coat of honesty, and I won't do it to Marion and I won't do it to you. I'll only say that I found enough to know it was a person, and enough to know it was her, because the desert preserves more than it should, and because some small thing was down there with her, caught up in the dirt, that I recognized. It was a hair clip, cheap little thing. Plastic, the kind with a butterfly on it, the kind a woman buys in a drugstore 3 for $1 and never thinks about again. I'd seen that clip 100 times. Marion wore them in her hair when she taught, to keep it back off her face, and the little ones in her class used to bring her new ones as gifts because she made such a fuss over them. Oh, look at this one, isn't this the prettiest one? Big laugh. Made every child feel like they'd handed her treasure. There it was in the dirt, butterfly, sun-bleached almost white. And I knew then, all the way down, that whatever had happened to that woman, she had not run off to a bigger life. She had not laughed her big laugh in some far-off town for 7 years. She had been here. 41 minutes walk from the porch where her husband couldn't make himself go the whole time, while the town built its stories, while they pulled their children close from Wade, while not one casserole came up that drive. She'd been here, and the only one in the whole county who'd known, who'd come every day and lain down on the warm dirt over her, and finally started carrying her home a rock at a time, was lying 10 feet off in the creosote shade with his chin on his paws, watching me find what he'd been trying to tell us all along. I climbed out of that hole. I sat down in the dirt, and for the first time in a long time, longer than I'll admit, I cried, out loud, like something tearing, for Marion, who I'd liked, and for Wade, whose life I'd just ended a second time without meaning to, and a little bit for myself, the coward who almost drove home. And the dog came over. Boone came and put his old gray head in my lap and leaned his whole weight into me, the way they do, and we sat there in that draw, the two of us, the only 2 souls in 7 years who'd come the whole way out to where she was. After a while I got up. I covered her back over gentle because I wasn't going to leave her open to the sky and the birds, not for 1 minute. I built the rocks back up over the place, Boone's rocks, the ones still left, and I marked the spot in my log book with the time and a careful little map, the way I mark everything, my hand shaking so bad I could barely read it back. Then I had to do the hardest part, the part I hadn't let myself think about the whole walkout. I had to walk back, past the wash, up the rise, and I had to decide with every step who I told first. The sheriff. Or Wade. Because there was a thing I hadn't faced yet, a thing that had been sitting under all my fear like a second body under the first. Somebody had dug that hole. Somebody had buried that woman 2 feet down in the dark and stacked rocks on her and let a whole town believe a lie for 7 years. And the only person who'd known which direction she went, the only person who'd said that's the way she went, was Wade. I started walking back toward the coffee place with the dog beside me and the sun going long across the flat, and I did not know any more what I was walking into. I'd been so sure. A hand on the back of a neck. You can't fake that, I'd told myself. You can't fake years. But a hole in the ground doesn't lie either. And both those things were true at the same time, and I had to carry them both up that rise, and I did not know God as my witness. I did not know which one I was about to hand to the man waiting at the top of it. I think he'd been there a long time. There was a stillness to him that you don't get from a man who just sat down, the stillness of a man who's been watching an empty horizon since morning, waiting for it to give something back. He had a cup of coffee gone cold beside him. He had his hands hanging off his knees. And when he saw me come up out of the low ground with the dog beside me and dirt to my elbows and a shovel in my hand, he didn't stand up. He just looked at me. And his face, Lord, his face, it wasn't the face of a man wondering what I'd found. It was the face of a man who already knew, and had known for 7 years, and had been waiting the whole time for the day somebody finally walked up his drive wearing that dirt. I stopped at the bottom of the steps. I had a whole walk's worth of words built up in me, and not one of them would come. The dog went up past me slow and climbed the steps, and lay down at Wade's feet with a groan, his job finished. And Wade reached down without looking and put his hand on that old gray head, and the two of them just stayed like that, and I understood that whatever was about to be said, those two had already lived it 1,000 times in the quiet. "You found her," Wade said. It wasn't a question. I'll never forget that it wasn't a question. "Wade," I said, my voice came out cracked. "I have to call the sheriff. You know I have to call the sheriff." "I know." And then he started to cry. Not loud. Wade Coffee didn't have a loud thing left in him. The tears just came down a face that didn't even change, like rain off a flat rock, and he kept his hand on his dog and he looked out at the horizon and he said, "I've been waiting on you. Or somebody. 7 years I've been waiting on somebody to come up this drive with that look on their face, so I could stop." He couldn't finish it. I came up the steps. I didn't know I was going to. I just couldn't stand at the bottom of them anymore, looking up at a man drowning. I sat down on the step below him and I put my old hand on that man's knee, the first human hand to touch him in kindness in 7 years near as I knew, and I said, "Tell me, whatever it is. Tell me now before they get here, because once they're here it's theirs and it'll never be yours again. Tell me what happened to Marion." And he did. I'm going to tell it the way he told it, because he earned that, and because the town owes him at least one telling of it that's straight. Marion was sick. That was the part nobody knew. She'd started getting headaches the winter before, bad ones. The kind that put her down in a dark room for a day at a stretch, and they'd gone to the doctor and then to the city to a better doctor, and they'd come home one March afternoon with a word for it that I won't repeat because Wade could barely say it. Something in her head, something growing where they couldn't reach it. And the city doctor had given her a number of months that was not a big number, and had described to them in the careful flat way those men have, what those months were going to take from her on the way out, what she'd lose. The big laugh first, probably, then the rest. She wasn't afraid of dying, Wade told me, and his hand never stopped moving on the dog's head, slow, steady, like it was the only thing keeping him in his body. She said she'd made her peace with dying back in the city in the parking lot of that hospital before we even got in the truck to come home. What she was afraid of was the unmaking. She kept saying that word. She didn't want the kids at school to watch her come apart. She didn't want me spending a year and a half feeding her and turning her and watching her forget my name. She said, his voice went down to almost nothing. She said she wanted to be remembered laughing. They had a place out past the wash. I didn't know that either, but it made a terrible kind of sense once he said it. When they were young and just married and poor, before the cattle ever paid, the two of them used to walk out there in the evenings because it didn't cost anything to walk. There was a draw out there where you could sit and watch the sun go down the whole length of the flat. That was their place, 41 minutes out, the spot where I dug. She picked the night, Wade said. She picked it herself. I want that understood. I have spent 7 years needing somebody to understand that I did not, that it was hers. She got pills from somewhere, I never asked where, and she didn't want to do it in the house where I'd have to keep living. She didn't want me to find her in our bed. So we drove out to the wash and we walked out to our place, and it was a clear night, and He stopped. The dog whined low. Wade pressed his palm flat against Boone's head and held it there and got himself back. She wanted to watch the stars come out, he said. So we did. We sat out there and we watched the stars come out, and she had her head on my shoulder, and at some point she just got heavier. That's all. She got heavier against me, and the laughing was over and she was gone, and it was the easiest I'd seen her breathe in 3 months, right there at the end. Peaceful. And then I was sitting in the dark in the middle of the desert holding my wife who just left me, and I had to decide what to do. You could have brought her in, I said, gentle. You could have told the truth. There's no law against a sick woman choosing her. There is, he said. There was, maybe. I didn't know. I'm a cattleman. I don't know the law. All I knew was she'd made me promise. He turned and looked at me full on for the first time, and the grief in him was a physical thing. It pushed at you. She made me promise her 2 things out there at the end. She said, don't let them cut me open to prove how I died. She didn't want that. After everything her body done to her, she didn't want strangers in it one more time. And she said, and here he had to fight for every word, she said, let them think I ran off. Let them think I left you. Because if they know I'm dead, they'll pity you, and you can't stand pity, and if they know how I died, they'll make it ugly, and I want to be the woman who laughed. Promise me, Wade. Let me run off. Let me be the one who left. He went quiet. So I promised, he said. I buried her at our place. I did it with my hands. Took me till morning. And I marked it with rocks so I'd always know, and I drove her truck out to the highway and left it where it'd look like she'd gone, and I came home and I shut the door and I kept my promise. I kept it while they decided I'd killed her. I kept it while they crossed the street. I kept it for 7 years because it was the last thing she ever asked me, and I was not. I was not going to fail her on the last thing. I sat there on that step with my hand on a dead man's knee, because that's what Wade was, a man who died 7 years ago and just kept walking around, and I understood, finally, all the way down, the size of what that man had carried. The town thought his silence was guilt. It was the loudest love I'd ever heard of. He'd let himself be branded a murderer rather than break a promise to a woman who couldn't be hurt by the truth anymore. He'd traded his whole life, his name, his place among living people, for her right to be remembered laughing. The dog, I said, it was all I could get out, Boone. Wade looked down at the old animal and something in his ruined face went soft. He was there, he said. That night, he came with us, rode out in the truck. He laid down next to her while we waited. And after, when I was digging, he wouldn't leave the spot. I had to carry him to the truck, and ever since, Wade shook his head slow. He goes out there. I never could stop him. 7 years he's been going out to keep her company, and this summer he started, his breath caught. He started bringing her home. I'd find the rocks on the porch, and I knew exactly what they were, and I couldn't look at them, and I couldn't throw them away. My own dog, trying to bring her back to me 1 stone at a time, because he could tell I was. He didn't finish, he didn't have to. Because the truth of it was sitting right there between us, plain as the cold coffee. That old half-blind dog had understood something the whole county missed. He'd watched his master die by inches inside that closed-up house, sealed alone with a secret that was eating him alive. And in whatever way a dog knows things, Boone had known that the only way to save Wade was to bring it out. to make somebody come. To break the 7-year silence with the one language, a dog has carry the thing home, lay it on the porch, again and again, until a slow human finally followed him out to where the truth was lying under the stars. The dog hadn't been digging up a murder. He'd been digging up his master's life, trying to give it back to him. I called the sheriff. I had to. There was no road around it. And I'll tell you the rest fast because the worst of it was already over. The second Wade said she wasn't afraid of dying. The new sheriff was a younger man than Cobb, and a better one, and when it all came out, and it did come out, the city doctor's records were still on file. The diagnosis was right there in black and white once anyone thought to look. There was no charge that stuck. A man burying his wife where she asked to be buried, keeping a promise that hurt only him. The law turned out to have more mercy in it than the town ever had. The town, that's the part that sits in me still. They were ashamed after. You could see it. The same people who'd pulled their kids close started showing up the coffee drive with their casseroles 7 years too late, and Wade took them, polite, quiet, the way he took everything, and I don't think a single one of those dishes made it past his porch before he scraped it for the dog. They wanted to be forgiven, is the thing. They wanted Wade to make them feel better about what they'd done to him. And he wouldn't do it, not because he was bitter. Wade didn't have bitter in him, but because he was busy. He had somewhere to be. They moved Marion official-like with the law watching, but Wade asked and the sheriff allowed that she be put back in the same draw when it was done. Their place, where the sun goes down the whole length of the flat. There's a real marker out there now, a proper stone, and the town paid for it, which I suppose is the only apology that ever reached him. Wade walks out there most evenings, 41 minutes each way. He's slower than he used to be, but he goes, and the dog goes with him, went with him, I should say, because Boone passed in his sleep that next spring, out on the porch in the sun, and Wade buried him out at the draw too, at Marion's feet, because where else? Where else would that dog go? I asked Wade once, near the end of that first hard year, why he thought Boone had started bringing the rocks home when he did. After all that time, why that summer? Wade thought about it a while. He thinks about everything a while. I figure he knew I was about done, he finally said. I'd stopped eating much, stopped going out. I figure that dog looked at me and decided he wasn't going to lose us both out there. He was quiet a second. He carried her home so I'd have a reason to dig myself back up. I write everything down, 31 years of it, rainfall and cattle weights in which fence post gave out. But that line I wrote down twice, once in my book and once on a card I keep in my vest behind the watch, because I never want to be the kind of slow man who has to learn a thing like that more than once. He carried her home, so I'd have a reason to dig myself back up. I drive that section road still, past the wash, past the low ground, past the coffee place. Some mornings, if the light's right, I'll see Wade out walking the flat toward the draw, an old man getting older, going to sit with his wife and his dog at the place where the sun goes down. And I'll slow the truck, old habit. You watch the things that matter whether you mean to or not. I never honk. I never wave him down. A man on that walk doesn't want company, and anyway I learned my lesson about the kindest thing you can do for Wade coffee, which is also the cruelest thing the town ever did to him, just turned right side out at last. You let him be quiet. You let him keep the promise.